the Obama administration entered, he had made one speech on Latin America. It was certainly not a major issue in the campaign, Latin America. Fundamentally, one had to interpret sort of Obama's more general view of foreign affairs, of U.S. foreign policy, than focusing on specifically what he was saying about Latin America. At this summit particularly, I think the formal agenda will be less important than the open discussions among the presidents, and obviously with a spotlight on our president, Barack Obama. Clearly, he came across well. His temperament, his style, his responses to questions. Throughout Latin America, people walked away feeling better about the U.S. than they had before.
Cuba is still a hot-button issue. It's still a domestic issue in the United States that attracts a lot of attention, particularly the closer you get to South Florida. And it also really divides the U.S. from many of its allies in Latin America. If you were to judge the Obama administration on the basis of fulfilling his campaign promises with respect to Cuba, I think you'd have to give him very, very good marks. The fact is that they have changed the travel policies. There is more direct discussion between the two countries on issues like migration, counter-narcotics, and also the setting up postal service. And there has obviously been a maintenance of the U.S. embargo. The fact that the United States managed to reach a compromise with other Latin American governments on the Cuba question at the OAS meeting was an important step in maintaining some semblance of hemispheric unity. I think the real downside for the OAS on the Cuba question is that there are a lot of extremely important issues facing the hemisphere, and Cuba's inclusion in the OAS really by rights shouldn't have been at the top of the list. It's somewhat ironic that the OAS meeting on Cuba was held in Honduras in early June, and by the end of that same month there had actually been a coup that took place in Honduras.
I am deeply concerned with the recent events in Honduras and have called on today's hearings to focus our attention on the crisis.
President Zelaya has more than his share of blame for provoking the crisis to begin with by defying the Supreme Court and the Congress. But the forced removal from Honduras was a clear violation of the Constitution and basic democratic norms.
I think the way it's worked out is far from ideal because there was a coup and the coup stood. Ideally, Zelaya would have returned, at least as a symbolic gesture. That would have sent a positive message. That wasn't possible. The conditions didn't allow it, no matter how much pressure there was internationally. And so the challenge now is to worry also about the society, about the governance, about the level of just social peace in Honduras. And for that, I think it's best that the country just move on.
It's interesting, I think, that we saw in the newspaper, and the Canadians have said more about this and been more critical than the U.S. The U.S. has been sort of joined Mexico and Brazil in not saying very much at all.
Problem with the U.S. is that it had a sort of an off-again, on-again involvement in Honduras. Working multilaterally and working in concert with Latin American partners doesn't mean disengaging and being on the sidelines. And sometimes it felt that way.
Creo que Honduras ha sacado a la luz primero la debilidad institucional que todavía existe en muchos países de América Latina, y ha sacado a la luz el debate ideológico y la fragmentación que hay en la región en cuanto a lo que te comentaba antes. El tipo de sociedad que se quiere tener, la relación con el mercado, el papel del Estado y sobre todo el tipo de democracia, los distintos tipos de democracia que se quieren para la región.
The financial crisis which is hitting us and has been around the world for around a year and a half by now, is starting to hit Latin America in a delayed fashion, but it is really hitting fairly hard.
Previously, Latin America had just been very vulnerable to these external shocks. And the fear was that here you had the U.S. going into its worst recession ever, its worst financial crisis. There's a financial crisis in a series of other countries that are crucial to Latin America.
For many of the countries, the external situation is getting more and more fragile as a result of falling exports, falling commodity prices, falling remittances, and also the drying up of the credit markets at the international level.
The decline, the downturn seemed to be, for most countries, shorter and less severe than it was globally. One would have expected large differences between some countries who seem to be managing so well, like Chile, and other countries that seem to be managing so badly, like Argentina or Venezuela. And instead, you had a real convergence in the impact of the crisis.
What I see is a region whose economic policymakers have really bought into the concept of macroeconomic stability. I see very little, with the possible exception of Argentina, very little counter-argument there.
What was the big story of 2009, looking at Latin America and the Caribbean?
Well, I think Mexico.
If it hasn't been swine flu, it's been the fight against drug trafficking and organized crime. It's also been the economic recession and the crisis that has hit Mexico probably hardest in Latin America.
I think this is the big issue in all of the region, is the insecurity, spreading organized crime, the penetration of organized crime. It's really weakening rule of law, democracy in many countries, and it moves around very quickly. So what you might say about a particular place at one point just can change very fast.
Well, I think that for a variety of reasons, beginning earlier than 2009, Brazil really emerged as a regional pole of power, an alternative to the United States. Its influence and stature worldwide grew enormously.
Lo cierto es que hay un desconocimiento de realmente qué quiere hacer, cuáles son, cuál va a ser su lista de prioridades en el mundo.
Discussions of Brazil always turn, is Brazil and the U.S. going to be partners? Are they going to sort of develop a strategic relationship? My real sense is that the issue for Brazil and the United States is not developing strong cooperation on issue after issue. It's not developing a partnership. It's finding a way to interact, to relate to one another, to engage one another constructively, and tolerate each other's differences.
Colombia has faced the most dangerous challenge. The most dangerous because our terrorist groups have been very wealthy, given that they are the owners of the narco-trafficking businesses.
On the basis, I think in the case of Brazil, they had just created the UNASUR organization a year or so ago. And so for them, this was defense issues, security issues were very important. And if the United States were going to enter into this kind of agreement, I think it was absolutely fundamental that there'd be extensive consultations and explanations to the Brazilians of what was happening, what the purpose was, why this was necessary, what the limits were, and so forth.
Where, at the end of the day, do you think we'll see Obama's relationship with Latin America?
Well, I think he has a very good sense of Latin America. I think Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has a very good sense of Latin America, and it would be hard to do better than Arturo Valenzuela, somebody that knows the region. I think the problem is, in some sense, it's his legacy from before, that what he inherited.
You know, I think the first year he got sidetracked and sort of distracted. Distracted in terms of the overall, just the tremendous plate and being inundated that he's been, but also just distracted in Latin America by the Honduras crisis, by the Colombian base issue, Cuba.
It's not the problem of him and his administration getting or not getting Latin America. I think there are some real serious problems that may take 4 years of Obama, 8 years of Obama, and still will not be resolved.
He's somebody who likes to make sort of investments. He's willing to sort of see whether he's investing some political capital, investing some time to see if it works, and to give it a chance. And I think that's what he's done in Latin America. And I think the Latin Americans may want a little bit more investment before they respond. That's kind of a dance that goes on in a give and take. The concern is on Latin America policy is that he'll feel that he has invested a lot, and hasn't been recognized or hasn't been reciprocated. And then that may make him less eager, really, to spend time on the region. And I think that would be unfortunate, and I think that's a real risk.